The morning fog clung to the Colorado River like a shroud veiling the secrets it had kept for decades. Jack Harlow stood on his weathered dock, his 62-year-old frame silhouetted against the breaking dawn. Though his hair had turned silver and deep lines marked his face, he carried himself with the unmistakable posture of a man who had once operated in the shadows of America's most dangerous battlefields. River Point, Arizona, was the kind of small town that appeared on maps, but existed primarily in the memories of those who'd grown up there. A place where time seemed to slow, where the rush of the modern world felt distant. For Jack, it was perfect, a place to disappear. He cast his line into the river's dark waters, the practiced motion automatic after thousands of repetitions. Fishing wasn't just a hobby, it was a meditation. The rhythm of cast and retrieve mirrored the controlled breathing techniques he'd learned decades ago in Bud S. training. Inhale, cast, exhale, wait. His weathered hands still powerful despite the arthritis beginning to curl. His fingers worked the line with precision. Jack's bait and tackle sat at the edge of town, a modest establishment that served the occasional tourists and the handful of locals who shared his passion for fishing. The store provided cover income and, most importantly, normalcy. No one in River Point suspected that the quiet man who sold them fishing gear had once been Lieutenant Jack Harlow, SEAL Team 6, with 11 confirmed operations that would never appear in any history book. The morning ritual never varied. Up at 4:30 hours perimeter check of his property, coffee brewed strong enough to stand a spoon in, then down to the river before the sun crested the canyon walls. Old habits died hard. 20 years removed from active duty, and Jack still couldn't sleep past dawn. As he reeled in his line empty again, his eyes scanned the tree line on the opposite bank, an unconscious security assessment. Most civilians looked at scenery. Jack looked for sightlines, cover positions, potential threats. He'd never fully turned off the warrior's mindset that had kept him alive through 3 decades of service. Back at his cabin, Jack unlocked the reinforced door with its 3 separate deadbolts. The modest exterior belied the fortress within. The windows were hurricane-grade, the walls reinforced, and beneath the hardwood floors ran a pressure-sensitive alarm system of his own design. In the master bedroom, behind a sliding bookcase that would have seemed melodramatic to anyone else, lay his personal arsenal. The M4A1 carbine, modified with a suppressor and ACOG sight, hung beside a Sig Sauer P226 Navy, the same model he'd carried during his SEAL days. Below them, a custom-built sniper rifle he'd never had to use, but maintained meticulously. Jack ran his fingers over the weapons, feeling the familiar weight and balance of each. Not paranoia, he told himself. Preparation. The scar that ran from his left shoulder blade to his right kidney twinged as he reached for the rifle, a souvenir from Afghanistan, 2002. Operation Enduring Freedom. The memory flashed unbidden, the whistle of incoming fire, the wet thud of rounds hitting flesh, carrying his spotter through mountain terrain with a bullet in his own back. Sometimes Jack wondered if he'd left more than blood in those mountains. Perhaps pieces of his soul had stayed behind, too. At exactly 0700 hours, Jack opened the bait shop. By 7:30, the regulars began to filter in, mostly retirees and weekend warriors looking for advice on lures and local hotspots. Jack played his role perfectly, the helpful, slightly gruff veteran who knew every bend in the river and every fish that swam it. "Morning, Jack," called Bill Freeman, River Point's police chief, as he pushed through the door. At 65, Freeman was the closest thing Jack had to a friend in town, though neither man would have used that term. They shared a tacit understanding, the unspoken bond of men who had seen things others couldn't imagine. "Chief," Jack acknowledged with a nod, continuing to stock the display of fishing flies. "Thought you might want to know." Freeman said casually, leaning against the counter. "We got some new folks in town. Some kind of development company, looking at property along the South Bend." Jack's hands paused momentarily, then continued their work. The South Bend less than 2 miles from his cabin. "That right? Yeah. Big talk about a resort condos the works." Freeman watched Jack carefully. "Guy in charge seems the slick type. Name's Coleman. Richard Coleman." Jack kept his expression neutral, but his mind was cataloging the information, filing it away. River Point wasn't the kind of place that attracted developers. The land along the South Bend was rough, not ideal for construction. Something didn't fit. "Appreciate the heads up," Jack replied. After Freeman left, Jack found himself staring out the window toward the South Bend of the river. Development meant people. People meant attention. Attention was something Jack had spent 20 years avoiding. But something else nagged at him, something beyond the simple disruption of his carefully constructed isolation. Later that night, a sudden crash outside his cabin sent Jack rolling from his bed to the floor, in one fluid motion, hand automatically reaching for the Sig Sauer he kept in the nightstand. Heart hammering, he crouched in the darkness, listening. After 30 seconds of silence, he identified the sound a raccoon had knocked over his trash can. Again. As his pulse slowed, Jack felt a familiar shame. The hair-trigger reflexes, the instant combat readiness, they were hard to explain to civilians. They didn't understand how the wiring in your brain changed after you'd been hunted by other men, how you never really came all the way home. The thunderstorm that rolled in around midnight provided a fitting backdrop to Jack's restless thoughts. As lightning illuminated his Spartan bedroom in strobe-like flashes, he found himself remembering Helmand Province 2010, the mission that had ended his career, the betrayal that had cost 4 good men their lives. Sleep, when it finally came, was thin and troubled, populated by ghosts who spoke in the voices of the dead. The stranger arrived in River Point on a Tuesday, the kind of day when nothing remarkable was supposed to happen. Jack first noticed her at Mabel's diner, sitting alone in a booth, nursing a cup of coffee and studying a map spread out on the table. Even from across the room, something about her posture triggered his instincts. She was attractive in a subtle way, mid to late 30s auburn hair, pulled back in a practical ponytail, lean build beneath simple clothing. But it wasn't her appearance that caught Jack's attention. It was how she sat back to the wall, clear view of both exits' eyes that scanned the room in a measured pattern that most people wouldn't notice, but Jack recognized immediately. Military or intelligence? Possibly both. Over the next 3 days, Jack observed her from a distance. She'd rented the Miller cabin up near Sawyer's Creek, paid cash for a month in advance, according to Mabel's gossip network. She bought minimal groceries, hiked along the river each morning, and spent hours taking photographs of the landscape with a high-end camera. A tourist story that was almost perfect. Almost. On the 4th day, Jack followed her. Not obviously, he'd been trained by the best in the world to track targets across hostile territory. He watched as she hiked to a ridge overlooking the south bend of the river, the same area the developers were interested in. She spent 2 hours there, but instead of taking scenic photos, she used a spotting scope to observe the activities below, where Coleman's people had set up a temporary office in trailers. When she left, Jack moved to her observation post. The position was perfect: clear view, multiple escape routes, natural concealment. Not the choice of a casual hiker, but of someone with training. The small pile of cigarette butts she'd buried suggested she'd used this spot multiple times. Jack carefully excavated 1 Marlboro Reds, the filter crushed in a distinctive way. A nervous habit, or something else. That evening, Jack drove into Flagstaff and used the internet cafe there. Never the local library where questions might be asked. He searched for information on Richard Coleman and his development company, Pinnacle Resorts. The company appeared legitimate on the surface with projects in Colorado and Nevada, but was only 3 years old. Too new, too perfect. The photos of Coleman nagged at Jack's memory, but he couldn't place the face. 2 days later, Jack was preparing to close the shop when the bell above the door jingled. The woman from the diner stood in the entrance, backlit by the afternoon sun. "I need fishing gear," she said, her voice confident, but with a softness that suggested the southeastern United States, Georgia maybe. "I'm told you're the expert." "Depends what you're fishing for," Jack replied, studying her. Up close, he could see the faint tan lines of someone who spent significant time outdoors, and the calluses on her hands weren't those of an office worker. "Just trout," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm Kate Reynolds, renting a place up by the creek." "Jack Harlow." He didn't offer his hand. "Tourist." "Something like that. Taking some time off. Heard this was a quiet place." "It is. Most folks come here because they're not looking for excitement." "And you, Mr. Harlow? What brought you to River Point?" The question was casual, but Jack felt the weight behind it. "Same as most. Quiet living." As he helped her select appropriate gear for river fishing, Jack noted how she examined each item with the eye of someone familiar with evaluating equipment. When he mentioned a particular spot known for good catches, she nodded slightly. She already knew the location. "Strange place for a resort," Jack commented as he rang up her purchases. Kate paused, her expression neutral. "What resort?" "Down at the South Bend. Developers looking to build something big." "Huh. Wouldn't have thought there'd be much demand out here." "My thought exactly." Their eyes met briefly, a moment of mutual assessment. Jack had interrogated enough people to recognize when someone was deciding how much truth to tell. "Well," she said, finally gathering her purchases, "maybe I'll check it out before they bulldoze everything. Thanks for the gear." "Watch yourself on the river," Jack called after her. "Currents can be tricky if you don't know what you're looking for." After she left, Jack locked the shop and drove to the ridge where Kate had been observing. From his truck, he retrieved a set of military-grade binoculars and settled in to watch the development site. 3 trailers, 6 men visible more inside, probably. Regular patrols around the perimeter, unusual for a civilian construction site. One man in particular caught his attention, tall military bearing, moving with the hyper-aware precision of someone with special operations background. As dusk fell, Jack made his decision. Whatever was happening at the South Bend wasn't legitimate development, and Kate Reynolds wasn't a tourist. Time to find out what game was being played on his turf. That night, Jack moved silently through the woods toward Kate's cabin. The security measures she'd implemented were good fishing lines strung between trees at ankle height, reflective tacks positioned to catch flashlight beams, but not good enough to stop someone of Jack's caliber. He reached the small structure without triggering any alarms and observed from the tree line. Through the window, he could see Kate working at a laptop, her face illuminated by the blue glow of the screen. On the table beside her lay a handgun, not the typical choice for self-defense, but a Glock 19 with what looked like a suppressor attachment. Definitely not a tourist. Jack was about to withdraw when Kate suddenly looked up straight toward his position. Impossible, he was fully concealed, motionless. But she moved with practiced efficiency, dousing the lights and disappearing from view. Jack immediately shifted position, moving deeper into the trees, but he'd underestimated her. The whisper of movement behind him came just seconds before he felt the cold press of a gun barrel against his neck. "Hands where I can see them." Kate's voice was steady, professional. "Then we're going to walk very slowly back to my cabin and have a conversation, Mr. Harlow. Or should I call you Lieutenant?" "You've got me confused with someone else," Jack said evenly, raising his hand slowly. "No confusion, Lieutenant Jack Harlow. SEAL Team 6 DevGru retired 2011 after the Helmand incident." Kate's voice remained calm, the pressure of the gun barrel unwavering. "Let's skip the denials. They're boring, and we have more important things to discuss." Inside the cabin, with the blinds drawn and a single lamp casting long shadows, Kate kept the Glock trained on Jack as he sat in the wooden chair she'd indicated. His own Sig Sauer now lay on the table between them, removed from his waistband, with the efficiency of someone who knew exactly where to look. "Who are you?" Jack asked, though he'd already begun piecing it together. "As far as River Point is concerned, I'm Catherine Reynolds, wildlife photographer." She remained standing, maintaining the tactical advantage. "But since we're being honest, I'm Rachel Harper, Office of Naval Intelligence. Was ONI anyway. Was. This operation isn't officially sanctioned. I'm on leave." Jack studied her face, looking for tells. "Personal, then?" Something flickered in her eyes, pain quickly suppressed. "Very. And what does ONI, unofficial ONI, want with a washed-up old SEAL?" Rachel set her gun down but remained out of Jack's reach. She rolled up her sleeve, revealing a small tattoo on her inner wrist, dots and dashes. Morse code. "DH." Jack read aloud, then understanding dawned. "David Harper. Your brother." "My brother," she confirmed, "who died in Helmand in 2010, along with 3 other SEALs on a mission that went catastrophically wrong because someone sold them out." The memories slammed into Jack like a physical blow. The ambush in the mountain, past the overwhelming firepower they'd faced, the impossible precision with which the enemy had targeted them. They'd walked into a trap, a perfectly laid trap that could only have been set by someone with intimate knowledge of their mission parameters. "David was my younger brother, followed me into the Navy. I was so proud when he made it through Bud S." Rachel's composure cracked slightly. "He wrote to me about his team leader, the legendary Jack Harlow. Said you were the best he'd ever served with." Jack looked away, the weight of command and failure heavy on his shoulders. "I got him killed." "No," Rachel said sharply. "Marcus Blackwood got him killed. The CIA liaison who sold your team's position to an Afghan warlord in exchange for $15 million and a memory stick containing classified NOC lists." Jack's head snapped up at the name. "Blackwood disappeared. Body never found. Because he wasn't dead. He's very much alive, and he's here in River Point under the name Richard Coleman." The pieces clicked into place, the vague familiarity of Coleman's face in the photographs aged and altered, but the same man who had briefed Jack's team before that fatal mission. "He's after something here," Rachel continued. "Something valuable enough to create an entire fake development company as cover." "What?" Rachel hesitated, then made a decision. In 1968, during Operation Broken Arrow, a tactical nuclear device went missing during transport. A W-54 SADM, Special Atomic Demolition Munition, backpack nuke designed for special forces to use behind enemy lines if the Cold War ever went hot. Jack stared at her. "That's a fairy tale, something they tell the new guys." "It's not. The device was being transported along the Colorado River when the team carrying it was ambushed. Official records say it was recovered, but that was a cover-up. The SADM remained lost, intentionally hidden by the survivors who didn't trust their superiors with that kind of power. And you think it's here, under my river?" Jack's disbelief was evident. "I know it is, and so does Blackwood." Rachel pulled out a file folder and spread photographs across the table. Satellite imagery, topographical maps, and what appeared to be pages from a decades-old mission report heavily redacted. The last surviving member of that transport team died 3 months ago. Before he passed, he contacted Oni with coordinates. Jack examined the materials, his tactical mind already processing implications. If Blackwood has these coordinates, he doesn't have the exact location, but he knows it's somewhere along the South Bend. That's why the sudden interest in development. It gives him cover to search extensively. "And what's your plan?" One former intelligence officer against Blackwood and however many mercenaries he's hired. Rachel's eyes met his determination evident. Originally, get confirmation on Blackwood's identity, locate the device call in a proper recovery team. But he's moving faster than expected, and his security is substantial. "You need help," Jack stated flatly. "I need someone who knows the river, someone with tactical experience who can't be connected to official channels, someone Blackwood won't recognize because he thinks they're dead." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Blackwood thinks I died in Helmand." "Official record shows you were critically wounded and later died of complications. Your request. You wanted to disappear." Jack stood and moved to the window, carefully peering through the blind at the night beyond. The weight of the past pressed down on him, the faces of the men he'd lost, the years of isolation, the carefully constructed anonymity of his existence in River Point. "If this device is real, and if Blackwood gets his hands on it," he began. "It would be catastrophic," Rachel finished. The W-54 was small, but powerful, equivalent to around 10 tons of TNT. In today's market, to the right buyer, it would be worth billions. Jack turned back to her, his decision already made. "I have conditions. Name them. We do this my way, my terrain, my rules, and when it's done, I go back to being a ghost." Rachel nodded. "Agreed. I'll need to bring in people I trust." "How many?" "2, maybe 3. Former teammates, men Blackwood won't know." Jack picked up his Sig Sauer from the table, checked it automatically, and returned it to his waistband. "We start tomorrow. I need to see everything you have on Blackwood's operation personnel equipment patterns." As he moved toward the door, Rachel called after him, "Jack, there's something else you should know." He paused, looking back at her. "The device, according to the dying man's testimony, it's still viable, still active." The implications hung heavy in the air between them. Not just a relic of the Cold War, but a functional nuclear weapon hidden beneath the peaceful surface of the Colorado River for over 50 years. Jack nodded, once his expression grim. "Get some sleep, Rachel. Tomorrow we go to war." The gray light of pre-dawn found Jack on his dock phone in hand, staring at a contact he hadn't called in over a decade. Mike Daniels had been his explosives expert, the man who could make anything from a simple distraction to a building-leveling charge with whatever materials were at hand. After Helmand, Mike had retreated to a cabin in Montana, as far from human contact as he could manage. Jack dialed. After 5 rings, a gruff voice answered. "This better be good. It's 4:30 in the goddamn morning." "Sierra Tango 197, Jack said, using their old mission confirmation code. Silence then. "Harlow, Jesus Christ, they told me you were dead. That was the idea. I need you, Mike." Another pause. "The Helmand thing connected. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't critical." Mike's sigh carried the weight of memories best left buried. "Location: River Point, Arizona, Colorado River. How fast can you be here?" 24 hours. Less if I break some speed limits." "Break them," Jack said. "And Mike, bring your kit." The second call was to Carlos "Doc" Rodriguez, former SEAL medic who now ran a cash-only clinic in Tucson, treating those who couldn't or wouldn't seek conventional medical care. Unlike Mike, Carlos didn't sound surprised to hear Jack's voice. "Always figured you were too stubborn to die," he said when Jack identified himself. "What kind of trouble you in Jefe?" "The national security kind." "Need your skills." "Medical or the other kind?" Carlos had been more than a medic. He'd been their secondary sniper and close-quarters specialist. "Both, and bring anything you've got for underwater operations." "Underwater? Damn, you don't ask for easy, do you? I'll be there tomorrow night." Jack spent the morning in his shop maintaining his cover while mentally cataloging the weapons and equipment he had hidden throughout his property. At noon, he closed early, hanging a "Gone Fishing" sign that would surprise no one in town. He drove to the ridge overlooking the development site, where he found Rachel already in position with her spotting scope. Without a word, he settled beside her and raised his own binoculars. "6 new arrivals this morning," Rachel reported. "Eastern European by their builds and movements, probably ex-military." Jack observed the men unloading equipment from unmarked trucks. "Spetsnaz," he commented. "The way they move the discipline. Russian Special Forces, or former anyway. You sure fought alongside them in joint ops, fought against them other times. I know how they operate." Through his binoculars, Jack focused on one man giving directions, tall, silver-haired, with the confident bearing of command. Despite the designer clothes and carefully groomed appearance, Jack recognized him immediately. "Blackwood," he murmured. "Older, but it's him." Rachel tensed beside him. "The man who betrayed your team." "The man who killed your brother," Jack corrected softly. "We'll get him." They spent 3 hours observing, noting shift changes, security patterns, and equipment. Blackwood's operation was professional and well-funded. Besides the original trailers, they'd established a perimeter of motion sensors and had begun assembling what appeared to be diving equipment. "They're planning to search the riverbed," Rachel noted. "We don't have much time." "We move tonight," Jack decided. "I need to see inside those trailers, get a better count of personnel and weaponry." As they prepared to leave, the sound of an approaching vehicle made them both freeze. A moment later, Police Chief Freeman appeared on the trail, alone and unarmed. "Figured I'd find you up here, Jack," he called, seemingly unsurprised to find Rachel there as well. "Been watching our new neighbors, too." Jack tensed, hand moving subtly toward his concealed weapon. "Just checking fishing spots, Bill." Freeman snorted. "Cut the crap, Lieutenant. Yeah, I know who you are. Known since you moved here." "How?" Jack demanded. "I was Army Ranger 75 to 96. Last posting was liaison to JSOC. Recognized your name, confirmed with a few old contacts." "Don't worry. Kept it to myself." Jack and Rachel exchanged glances. Freeman continued. "Those aren't developers down there. Way too much security, too many men with military bearing. Something stinks." After a moment's deliberation, Jack made a decision. "Bill, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels." Freeman listened without interruption as Jack explained the situation, Blackwood's betrayal, the hidden nuclear device, the unsanctioned operation to recover it. When Jack finished, the police chief nodded slowly. "Town of 200 people sitting on a nuclear weapon. God damn." He removed his hat, ran a hand through thinning gray hair. "What do you need from me? Keep your department away from the South Bend. If anyone asks, say it's restricted due to unstable ground from recent rains, and I may need access to your department's armory." Freeman nodded. "Done, but I want in. This is my town, too." Jack studied the older man, evaluating. Despite his age, Freeman was fit with the alert eyes of someone who hadn't forgotten his training. "You still qualify with a rifle." A slow smile spread across Freeman's weathered face. Expert marksman, 20 years running. Annual competition winner at the county level. Welcome aboard, Chief. That evening, Jack met Rachel at his cabin to finalize their reconnaissance plan. As he laid out topographical maps of the river and surrounding terrain, he noticed her studying the photographs on his sparse shelving pictures of his SEAL team from earlier, happier days. "Is that him?" she asked quietly, pointing to a young operator with a wide grin, arm thrown around the shoulders of a man Jack recognized as himself, 15 years younger. "David." "Yeah." Jack looked at the photo with a pang of regret. Hell of a swimmer. Could stay underwater longer than anyone I'd ever seen. Rachel touched the frame gently. "He wrote about that in his letters. Said you called him Fish. We all had call signs. Mine was Ghost. Because you could disappear in any environment." Jack nodded, memories flooding back. "Your brother saved my life in Kandahar 2009, Taliban ambush. I never got to repay that debt." "Maybe this is how," Rachel said softly. Their planning session lasted until midnight. The operation would be simple, but dangerous. Jack would infiltrate the development site while Rachel provided overwatch from the ridge. Primary objective: intelligence gathering. Secondary objective: plant tracking devices on their vehicles to monitor movements. As they prepared to move out, Jack opened a hidden compartment in his floor and removed a black case. Inside lay specialized equipment he'd hoped never to use again: a tactical infiltration suit, night vision goggles, communications gear, and a suppressed MK-23 pistol. Rachel raised an eyebrow. "That's not standard retirement gear." "The Navy let me keep a few souvenirs," Jack replied dryly. "Call it payment for services rendered." They moved through the forest like shadows, using the river's sound to mask their approach. At the perimeter, Jack spotted the first sensor, a modern motion detector disguised as a rock. He carefully skirted it, identifying the blind spots in the security system. "I count 8 guards," Rachel whispered through their comlink. 2 by the main trailer, 2 patrolling, 4 at rest positions." "Copy that," Jack murmured. Moving in. He advanced methodically, using natural cover and the techniques that had made him a legend among special operators. Freezing when the guards looked his way, moving only when their attention was elsewhere, he made his way to the cluster of trailers. The main trailer was clearly Blackwood's command center. Through a partially open window, Jack could hear voices: Blackwood and another man speaking in low tones. He positioned himself beneath the window, straining to hear. "Sonar shows anomalies in the riverbed at these 3 points," an accented voice was saying. "Could be natural formations, could be what we're looking for." "Begin diving operations tomorrow," Blackwood ordered. "I want teams in the water at first light." "The locals?" "Not a concern. They're simple people. The police chief has been paid to look the other way." Jack's jaw tightened. Freeman was many things, but corrupt wasn't one of them. Blackwood had made a critical error in judgment. "And if we encounter resistance?" the accented voice asked. "Eliminate it, quietly. Once we have the device, it won't matter." "We'll be ghosts." Jack took a calculated risk and raised his head slightly to peer through the window. Inside, Blackwood stood over a table covered with maps and equipment. Beside him was a tall, lean man with the cold eyes of a professional killer. On the wall behind them hung a detailed topographical map of the river with 3 locations marked in red. Jack memorized the locations, then carefully withdrew. He'd seen enough. As he began his exfiltration, a guard rounded the corner of the trailer unexpectedly. Both men froze in momentary surprise. The guard recovered first, reaching for his weapon. Jack moved with the speed and precision of decades of training, closing the distance in 2 steps. One hand clamped over the man's mouth, The other delivered a precise strike to the carotid artery. The guard collapsed without a sound. Jack dragged the unconscious man into the shadows and quickly zip-tied his hands and feet. He'd be found eventually, but by then, Jack would be long gone. "Status?" Rachel's tense voice came through the comm. "Proceeding to exfil," Jack replied softly. "Mission accomplished. They begin diving tomorrow." As he moved back through the perimeter, Jack felt a familiar sensation, the cold focus of combat, the heightened awareness of a mission in progress. For all his talk of retirement and quiet living, this, the calculated risk, the life-or-death stakes, was what he'd been trained for, what he'd excelled at, what he'd missed. Back at the ridge, Rachel awaited him, relief evident in her eyes. "You made it." "Told you I was good," Jack replied with the ghost of a smile. "Got what we needed. They've narrowed the search area to 3 locations along the river." They hiked back toward Jack's cabin in silence, the weight of the coming conflict heavy between them. As they approached the clearing, Jack suddenly raised a hand, signaling Rachel to stop. "Someone's inside," he whispered, drawing his weapon. They approached cautiously, using the trees for cover. Through the window, a shadow moved across the interior. Jack circled to the rear entrance while Rachel covered the front. On his count, they burst through both doors simultaneously, weapons raised. The large figure seated calmly at Jack's kitchen table raised his hands lazily. "Took you long enough. Coffee's getting cold." Jack lowered his pistol, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Mike, you're early." Mike Daniels. Years old, with a build like a bull and hands that could crush walnuts, shrugged massive shoulders. "Had a tailwind." His eyes shifted to Rachel, assessing. "This, the Oni agent. Rachel Harper," she introduced herself, holstering her weapon. "David's sister." Mike's expression softened slightly. "Fish was a good kid. One of our best." He turned back to Jack. "So you gonna tell me why we're hunting a traitor after all these years? And what's this about a nuke in the river?" Jack looked at his old friend, the man who'd pulled him from burning vehicles, who'd stood back to back with him in firefights across 3 continents, who'd carried the bodies of their fallen brothers in Helmand. "It's a long story," Jack said, settling into a chair. "And you're not going to believe half of it." Mike poured himself another cup of coffee from Jack's pot. "Try me. I drove 12 hours straight to get here. Least you can do is tell me what kind of suicide mission I signed up for." As the night deepened around the isolated cabin, Jack laid out everything they knew. The W-54 SADM hidden somewhere in the riverbed. Blackwood's mercenary force searching for it. The imminent threat if they succeeded. When he finished, Mike was silent for a long moment, turning his coffee mug in scarred hands. Finally, he looked up, eyes hard with resolve. "So we're going up against a former CIA operator with a private army of ex-Spetsnaz to find a 50-year-old nuclear weapon before they do." He snorted. "And here I thought retirement was getting boring." "Carlos will be here tomorrow," Jack said. "That gives us 3 SEAL operators, 1 Oni agent, and a ranger. Against what, 20 mercenaries? 22 at last count," Rachel corrected. "All with special forces training." Mike grinned, the expression transforming his rugged face into something almost predatory. "I like those odds. Almost fair." Jack spread the river maps across the table. "They've identified 3 potential locations. We need to find the device before they do." "And if we can't?" Mike asked. Jack's eyes met Rachel's, then Mike's. "Then we make sure they don't leave with it. Whatever it takes." The unspoken understanding passed between them. This was a mission with no extraction plan, no backup, no official support. If they failed, the consequences would be catastrophic. If they succeeded, no one would ever know what they'd done. Just like old times. As dawn approached, the three sat around Jack's table, weapons laid out for cleaning plans, drawn and redrawn. The years seemed to fall away as they worked muscle memory and shared experiences, creating a seamless team once more. Jack Harlow, the ghost who had disappeared into the quiet backdrop of River Point, was gone. In his place sat the SEAL commander, focused, lethal, alive, in a way he hadn't been for years. The hunt had begun. The morning light filtered through the pines as Carlos Rodriguez's weathered Jeep rumbled up the dirt road to Jack's cabin. At 60 years old, the former SEAL medic moved with the careful precision of a man intimately familiar with how bodies break and how they heal. His salt and pepper hair was cropped short, his face deeply tanned from the Arizona sun eyes hidden behind polarized sunglasses. Jack met him on the porch, the two men exchanging a silent handshake that said more than words ever could. Behind them, Mike emerged from the cabin carrying a mug of coffee. "Doc," Mike acknowledged with a nod. "Demolitions," Carlos replied with the ghost of a smile. "Still blowing shit up. Only when necessary." The three men stood for a moment, the weight of their shared history settling around them. They had buried teammates together, bled together, survived impossible odds together. Now, years later, fate had drawn them back into the shadow world they had once inhabited. Inside, Rachel had transformed Jack's living room into an operations center. Maps covered the walls. Surveillance photos were arranged chronologically, and a secure laptop displayed satellite imagery of the river. She looked up as the men entered, immediately assessing Carlos with the practiced eye of an intelligence officer. "Welcome to the war room, Doc," Jack said. "Rachel Harper, Office of Naval Intelligence. Rachel, this is Carlos Rodriguez, best combat medic in the teams, and a decent shot when he needs to be." "Decent?" Carlos raised an eyebrow. "I outscored you in the last 3 qualifications. You had a better scope." The familiar banter eased the tension as Carlos set down his bags. He opened one to reveal an impressive array of medical supplies far beyond standard first aid. The second bag contained something more lethal, a disassembled sniper rifle with a specialized barrel. "SR-25, Carlos explained, noticing Rachel's interest. "Modified for subsonic rounds, quieter than a whisper when suppressed." "You came prepared," she commented. "Jack said it was important." Carlos looked around at the assembled intelligence. "So we're hunting nukes and traitors, just like the good old days." For the next hour, the team briefed Carlos on the situation while he methodically cleaned and assembled his rifle. When they finished, he was silent for a long moment, absorbing the information. "Blackwood," he finally said the name like acid on his tongue. "I always wondered what happened to that snake." He looked at Jack. "You know he'll kill us all if he gets the chance." "Not if we get him first," Mike growled. Jack unrolled a detailed topographic map of the river. "Blackwood has identified 3 potential locations where the SADM might be hidden, all within this 5-mile stretch. His team begins diving operations today." Carlos studied the map. "What's the water like? Depth, current, visibility?" "Variable," Rachel answered. 15 to 30 feet deep, depending on the location. Current is moderate to strong in places. Visibility about 5 to 10 feet in the clearest areas. "That's going to make their search difficult," Carlos noted. "Even with modern equipment, finding a 50-year-old device in those conditions is challenging." "Which gives us time," Jack said. "Mike, what did you bring for underwater work?" Mike grinned and hefted a heavy duffel bag onto the table. "Special delivery. Shaped charges designed for underwater use. Remote detonators with encrypted signals. And these beauties..." He removed what looked like ordinary rocks, motion sensors disguised as river stones. Navy's latest, not even available to most active duty teams yet. I won't ask how you got those, Jack said dryly. Better if you don't. A knock at the door silenced them. Jack motioned for the others to move to defensive positions while he approached the entrance, hand on his sidearm. Peering through the peephole, he relaxed slightly and opened the door. Chief Freeman stood on the porch dressed in civilian clothes with a rifle case under his arm. "Reporting for duty," he said simply. Jack ushered him inside. "Bill, meet the team. Mike Daniels, Carlos Rodriguez, both former SEALs. You know Rachel." Freeman nodded to each in turn. "Figured you could use these." He handed Jack a small box. Inside were 6 police band radios. "Secure Channel 3. Won't carry far, but they're not on any frequency Blackwood's people would monitor." "Smart," Jack acknowledged. "What about your department?" "Told my deputies there's a federal operation in progress. Environmental Protection Agency investigating possible contamination at the South Bend. They're to stay clear." Freeman's weathered face creased in a humorless smile. "Not entirely a lie." The team settled around the table as Jack outlined their strategy. "We need to find the device before Blackwood." Rachel's contact provided coordinates, but they're decades old, and the river's changed course slightly since then. "I've triangulated the most likely location based on the original coordinates and historical river flow data," Rachel added, pointing to a spot on the map that didn't quite align with any of Blackwood's 3 target areas. "It's here in this underwater cave system beneath the eastern bank." "Why wouldn't Blackwood's analysis show the same location?" Carlos asked. "Because he doesn't have the original mission parameters," Rachel explained. "The team that hid the device used a specific SEAL protocol from that era, bury at the 3rd marker, not the X. Standard misdirection, in case the maps fell into enemy hands." Mike whistled softly. "Smart. Old school." "We need to get into that cave system tonight," Jack decided. "Verify if the device is there, secure it if possible. Meanwhile, we'll monitor Blackwood's diving operations to keep track of their progress." "What about extraction?" Carlos asked. "That device will weigh at least 50 pounds, possibly waterlogged, after all these years." Jack turned to Mike. "That's where you come in. I need a distraction on the far side of Blackwood's camp. Something flashy, but not immediately threatening." Mike's eyes lit up. "I can arrange that. Chief, you and Carlos will establish overwatch positions here and here." Jack continued, marking 2 ridges on the map. "You'll provide cover and monitor Blackwood's response to the distraction." "And us?" Rachel asked, gesturing between herself and Jack. "We're going swimming." The team spent the day preparing equipment and establishing communication protocols. As sunset approached, Jack led them to a small boathouse hidden along a secluded stretch of the river. Inside, beneath canvas tarps, lay a rigid-hull inflatable boat with a nearly silent electric motor. "Navy retirement gift?" Mike asked with a raised eyebrow. "Something like that," Jack replied. "She'll get us close to the cave entrance without alerting Blackwood's sentries." As darkness fell, they moved into position. Carlos and Freeman took their overwatch positions on the ridges, each equipped with night vision and long-range communications. Mike disappeared into the forest, carrying his bag of explosive surprises, heading toward the far side of Blackwood's operation. Jack and Rachel prepared for their dive at the boathouse. They donned specialized tactical wetsuits designed for stealth operations, matte black with reinforced knees and elbows. Jack noticed Rachel handling the gear with practiced familiarity. "You've done this before," he observed. "Only field qualification includes combat diving," she replied, checking her underwater light. "Though it's been a while since I've had to use it." "Stay close to me in the water," Jack instructed. "River currents can be unpredictable, especially at night." If we get separated, make for the eastern bank and signal your position. Rachel nodded, then paused in her preparations. Jack, if we find the device, what's the end game here? We can't exactly turn it over to local authorities. I have a secure government contact, Jack said after a moment. Someone outside Blackwood's reach who can arrange proper disposal. But first, we need to find it. They loaded their gear into the boat and slipped silently into the river. The night was clear, stars reflected on the water's surface as they navigated downstream. Jack kept the boat close to the eastern bank, using the shadows for concealment. Overwatch 1 radio check, Jack murmured into his comm. Overwatch 1 clear, came Freeman's reply. No movement on the eastern perimeter. Overwatch 2 radio check. Overwatch 2 clear, Carlos confirmed. I count 4 sentries at the main camp. Diving equipment is secured for the night. Demolition radio check. Mike's voice crackled through the speaker. Demolition ready. Packages are in place. Awaiting your signal. Jack cut the boat's motor as they approached a bend in the river. Ahead, barely visible through the trees, lights from Blackwood's camp illuminated the shoreline. He guided the boat to a small inlet about half a mile upstream from the camp. This is our entry point, he whispered to Rachel. The cave system extends beneath this bank. The entrance should be approximately 20 feet down, hidden by an underwater rock formation. They donned their diving gear, lightweight rebreathers that recycled exhaled air, eliminating telltale bubbles. Before submerging, Jack pressed his radio transmit button 3 times in quick succession, the signal for Mike to initiate his distraction. Moments later, the night sky illuminated as a series of explosions rocked the far side of Blackwood's camp. Not destructive blasts, but dazzling, disorienting flashes designed to draw attention and resources away from the river. That's our cue, Jack said, slipping into the dark water. Rachel followed, and they descended together into the murky depths of the Colorado River. Jack switched on a low-intensity red light that would be difficult to spot from the surface, but provided enough illumination to navigate. The current was stronger than expected, pulling at them as they swam deeper. Visibility was poor, perhaps 6 feet at most. Jack led the way, following the contours of the riverbed toward the coordinates Rachel had identified. The underwater landscape was alien and disorienting, rock formations looming suddenly out of the darkness like sentinels. After 5 minutes of steady swimming, Jack spotted what they were looking for. A narrow crevice in the rock face, barely wide enough for a diver to pass through. He signaled to Rachel, then carefully maneuvered into the opening. The passage twisted sharply before opening into a larger underwater chamber. Jack's light revealed a cavernous space with an air pocket at the top. They surfaced cautiously, finding themselves in a grotto, about 15 feet across, with a small rocky shelf above the waterline. "We can talk here," Jack said softly, removing his mouthpiece. "Sound won't carry outside the cave." Rachel pulled herself onto the rocky shelf, water streaming from her wetsuit. "Is this natural?" she asked, gesturing to the chamber. "Partially, but it's been enhanced." Jack directed his light toward one wall, revealing what appeared to be tool marks in the stone. Someone expanded this space decades ago. They searched the chamber methodically, examining every crevice and depression in the rock. After 15 minutes, Rachel let out a frustrated sigh. "Nothing? Could the coordinates be wrong?" Jack's light caught something, a series of small markings carved into the rock near the water's edge. He moved closer, running his fingers over the indentations. "Look at this," he called softly. "Morse code." Rachel joined him, studying the markings. A, V, I, she translated slowly. S, A, L. She looked at Jack. Navy SEALs. The original team left their mark, Jack murmured. We're in the right place. He continued examining the wall around the carving, pressing against the rock surface. There must be. A section of the wall shifted slightly under his hand. Jack applied more pressure, and a rectangular portion of the rock face swung inward, with a faint grinding noise revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay a cylindrical object, approximately the size of a large backpack, encased in what appeared to be specialized waterproof material. Military markings, faded but still legible, adorned the surface. "Is that it?" Rachel whispered, her voice tight with tension. Jack nodded grimly. "That's our SADM." The device was smaller than Rachel had imagined, perhaps 3 feet long and 18 inches in diameter. Its unassuming appearance belied its devastating potential. "Can we move it?" she asked. Jack examined the compartment carefully before answering. "Yes, but we need to be extremely careful. These devices were designed to withstand rough handling, but after 50 years underwater, I don't want to take chances." He reached into his dive bag and removed a specialized waterproof case. "We'll transfer it into this, then bring it to the surface using lift bags to control the ascent." As they worked to secure the device, Jack's radio crackled to life. "Ghost, this is Overwatch 2. We have a situation." Carlos's voice was tense. "Blackwood's men detected the boat. They're sending a team to investigate your position. ETA 3 minutes. Jack and Rachel exchanged alarmed glances. "Acknowledged," Jack responded. "Proceeding with extraction." "Negative," Carlos interrupted. "No time. Oh, 2 boats, 8 men heavily armed. You need to disappear. Now." Jack made a split-second decision. "We'll have to leave it secured here and come back when it's clear." He carefully returned the SADM to its compartment and closed the hidden door, ensuring it looked undisturbed. "Let's move." They quickly donned their rebreathers and slipped back into the water. Jack led them through a different passage he'd spotted, narrower and more difficult to navigate, but it emerged farther downstream away from their entry point. As they exited the cave system, the sound of boat motors became audible through the water. Jack signaled Rachel to stay close to the riverbed, using the natural contours for concealment. They swam cautiously, conserving air, moving with the current, to put distance between themselves and their pursuers. After 20 tense minutes, they surfaced in a secluded cove nearly a mile downstream. The sounds of the search had faded, but flashlight beams still swept the river in the distance. "Overwatch 1 status report," Jack whispered into his radio. "Search team still active near the cave entrance," Freeman reported. "They found your boat. Appears they're setting up a more permanent presence in the area." Demolition report. "Distraction worked too well," Mike replied, a note of dark humor in his voice. "They've doubled the guard on the western perimeter. I'm pinned down in the tree line. Going to be a while before I can extract." Jack helped Rachel onto the shore. Despite the wetsuit, she was shivering from the prolonged immersion in the cold river water. "We need to get back to the cabin," he said, surveying their surroundings. "It's 3 miles through the forest. Can you make it?" Rachel nodded, determination hardening her features. "Lead the way." They moved through the forest like shadows, avoiding trails and open ground. Jack set a demanding pace, but Rachel kept up without complaint. Her own eye training was evident in the way she moved, deliberate, efficient, minimizing noise. Dawn was breaking as they finally reached Jack's cabin. Carlos was waiting for them, his rifle within easy reach. "Freeman's still on Overwatch," he reported as they entered. "Mike made it out about an hour ago, went to retrieve his vehicle." Jack stripped off his wetsuit, muscles aching from the swim and the long trek through the woods. Blackwood's response: Full alert. They've suspended diving operations and focused on securing their perimeter. Brought in additional personnel from somewhere. 4 more men arrived by helicopter an hour ago. What about the cave? Rachel asked, accepting the towel Carlos offered. They found the entrance. Divers went in but came out empty-handed. My guess is they didn't find the hidden compartment. Jack nodded, relief washing through him. The markings are subtle unless you know what to look for, but they'll keep searching. So the device is secure for now, Rachel confirmed. For now, Jack agreed. But Blackwood won't give up, and we've lost the element of surprise. The front door opened and Mike entered carrying a tray of coffee cups. Figured we could use some caffeine. Mabel's diner is buzzing with talk about strange explosions in the night. I told her it was probably kids with fireworks. They gathered around the kitchen table, steam rising from the coffee cups as they assessed their situation. Blackwood knows someone is interfering, Jack said, but he doesn't know who or why. That's our only advantage now. We need to recover the device before they find it, Rachel insisted. Now that we know exactly where it is, we can plan a proper extraction. It won't be easy, Carlos warned. They've established a floating checkpoint on the river. No boat is getting near that cave without being spotted. Jack sipped his coffee, mind working through scenarios. Then, we don't use a boat. We create another distraction, bigger this time, something that forces them to pull resources away from the river entirely. Mike's eyes gleamed. I might have an idea about that. Before he could elaborate, Freeman's voice came urgently through the radio. Team, be advised. Vehicle convoy approaching River Point from the south. 3 black SUVs, probably Blackwood's men. They're moving into town. Jack's expression darkened. They're expanding their search, putting pressure on the locals. What's our play? Carlos asked. We need to know what they're doing, Jack decided. Rachel, you're least likely to be recognized. Take Freeman's truck into town, standard reconnaissance. Don't engage, just observe. Rachel nodded and changed quickly into civilian clothes. Jack handed her a concealed earpiece. Constant communication. If anything feels wrong, you extract immediately. After she departed, Jack turned to the others. We need to accelerate our timeline. Blackwood's getting desperate, which makes him dangerous. More dangerous than a nuclear device in a river? Mike asked dryly. Much more, Jack confirmed. Because Blackwood with a nuclear device is a threat to the entire country. Rachel returned from town 2 hours later, her expression grave. Blackwood's men are questioning everyone about unusual activities or strangers in the area. They're claiming to be federal agents investigating environmental violations. Anyone talking? Carlos asked. Not yet, but they're being insistent, especially with business owners along the river. Jack considered this development. They'll eventually work their way out to the residential areas. We need to move the device tonight before they connect the dots. He spread the river map across the table. The original extraction plan won't work now. We need something new. His finger traced the river's course. Here's what I'm thinking. For the next hour, they developed a daring plan. Mike would create a major distraction at Blackwood's main camp, not just noise and light this time, but actual damage to their equipment and infrastructure. Meanwhile, Carlos and Freeman would establish blocking positions along the river road to prevent reinforcements from arriving. Jack and Rachel would return to the cave, retrieve the device, and transport it via an underwater route to a secondary extraction point, where Mike would meet them with a vehicle. It's risky, Carlos observed when Jack finished outlining the plan. A lot of moving parts. We've operated with worse odds, Jack reminded him. In our younger days, Mike added with a grim smile. The cabin's landline phone rang, startling them all. Jack answered cautiously. Harlow's bait and tackle. Mr. Harlow? came a smooth, cultured voice that sent a chill down Jack's spine. "This is Richard Coleman. I believe we have some mutual interests to discuss." Jack's eyes met Rachel's, his expression warning her to remain polite. "Mr. Coleman, what can I do for you? I understand you're something of a local expert on the river. I'd like to hire your services as a guide for a special project we're undertaking." "What kind of project?" Jack asked, playing for time. "Perhaps we could discuss it in person. My associates and I would be happy to visit your establishment. Say within the hour." The threat was thinly veiled. Blackwood had somehow connected Jack to the interference with his operation. "I'm actually on my way into town," Jack replied easily. "Why don't I stop by your office? The trailer's at the South Bend, right?" A pause. Then, "That would be acceptable. 2 o'clock. I'll be there." After hanging up, Jack turned to the team. "Blackwood wants a meeting. He suspects something, but he's not certain yet." "It's a trap," Rachel said immediately. "Of course it is," Jack agreed. "But it's also an opportunity. While he's focused on me, the rest of you can prepare for tonight's operation." "You can't go alone?" Carlos protested. "I won't." Jack looked at Mike. "Feel like taking a ride?" Mike grinned. "Thought you'd never ask." They spent the next hour preparing. Jack and Mike would present themselves as local business owners concerned about the development's impact on fishing and tourism. Their real purpose was to gather intelligence on Blackwood's security arrangements and, if possible, plant additional surveillance devices. "If we're not back in 2 hours, implement the contingency plan," Jack instructed Rachel and Carlos. "Get the device and get it to the contact." Rachel grabbed Jack's arm as he prepared to leave. "Be careful. Blackwood's already killed 4 seals. He won't hesitate to make it 6. Jack nodded grimly. "That's what I'm counting on." The drive to Blackwood's compound was tense, but uneventful. Jack and Mike arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, presenting themselves at the security checkpoint with the casual confidence of civilians who suspected nothing. "Jack Harlow and Mike Daniels to see Mr. Coleman," Jack told the guard, a burly man with the unmistakable bearing of ex-military. "He's expecting us." They were escorted to the main trailer, their surroundings revealing much to their trained eyes. Jack counted 22 men on site, noted the positions of security cameras and motion sensors, identified the communications hub in the smallest trailer. All valuable intelligence for tonight's operation. Blackwood greeted them in what served as his office, a well-appointed space that seemed incongruous in the temporary structure. His silver hair was immaculately styled, his clothes expensively casual. Nothing about his appearance suggested the ruthless traitor who had sold out his country for profit. "Mr. Harlow, thank you for coming," Blackwood said smoothly, his gaze sliding to Mike. "And you brought a colleague." "Mike Daniels," Jack introduced, "runs the charter fishing business downriver. We're both concerned about how your development might impact the local economy." "Purely selfish concerns, then," Blackwood observed with a thin smile. "Please sit." As they settled into chairs, Jack noted the positions of the 2 guards stationed discreetly by the door. Armed, professional, dangerous. Blackwood remained standing, moving to a sideboard where he poured 3 glasses of scotch. "Gentlemen, let me be direct," he said, handing them each a glass. "Certain activities around our operation have raised concerns. Unauthorized persons near our equipment, unusual disturbances. Sounds like you might have security problems," Mike commented, swirling the scotch but not drinking. Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Indeed. Which is why we're strengthening our measures. The river will be completely off-limits near our property, effective immediately." "That's going to be a problem for business," Jack said, matching Blackwood's casual tone. The South Bend has some of the best fishing spots. A temporary inconvenience for long-term benefit, Blackwood assured him. Our development will bring tourists jobs, prosperity. The conversation continued in this vein, a verbal chess match, where each man carefully avoided revealing his true intentions. Jack allowed himself to appear gradually convinced by Blackwood's arguments, playing the role of a simple businessman won over by promises of economic growth. Throughout the meeting, Jack placed two small surveillance devices, one under the chair. He occupied another beneath the map table when he leaned over to examine the development plans. Mike created a distraction at one point, asking about environmental impact studies, allowing Jack to glimpse a computer screen showing security rotation schedules. After 45 minutes, Jack rose to leave. "Well, Mr. Coleman, you've given us a lot to think about. I appreciate you taking the time." "My pleasure," Blackwood replied, shaking their hands. "I'm glad we could clear the air. I've always found that direct communication prevents misunderstandings." As they turned to leave, Blackwood added casually, "One more thing, Mr. Harlow. Have you lived in River Point long?" "About 7 years," Jack answered, instantly alert to the shift in conversation. "Interesting. You seem very at home here, almost as if you were born to the river." Blackwood's eyes bore into Jack's. "Some men adapt quickly to new environments, a rare skill. One might even call it ghost-like." The reference to Jack's old call sign hung in the air between them. Jack maintained his neutral expression, but internally his mind raced. Blackwood suspected, but wasn't certain. "I've always been a quick study," Jack replied with an easy smile. "River's in my blood now." Blackwood nodded slowly. "Blood, yes. A powerful connection." He gestured toward the door. "My men will escort you back to your vehicle." The drive back to Jack's cabin was silent, both men keenly aware they were likely being followed. Only after taking a circuitous route and confirming they had no tail did Mike speak. "He knows something." "He suspects," Jack corrected, "but he's not sure. The ghost he remembers supposedly died in Helmand." "What about the devices already transmitting?" Jack confirmed, checking his phone, where a secure app showed the signals from the bugs he'd planted. "We'll have eyes and ears in his operation." Back at the cabin, they briefed the team on what they'd learned. The surveillance devices provided crucial information. Blackwood had scheduled additional divers to explore the cave system at dawn, and security rotations had been modified to strengthen the river watch. "Our window is closing," Jack concluded. "We move tonight as planned." As dusk approached, they made final preparations. Mike loaded his truck with the specialized explosive charges he'd prepared. Carlos cleaned his rifle methodically, checking and rechecking the scope alignment. Freeman arrived with additional police radios and information about roadblocks Blackwood's men had established. Rachel spent time studying the underwater maps, memorizing the escape route they would take after retrieving the device. Jack noticed her hands trembling slightly as she traced the path with her finger. "Second thoughts?" he asked quietly, joining her at the table. She shook her head. "No, just, this is bigger than anything I've handled before." "If we fail." "We won't," Jack assured her, though they both knew it was a promise he couldn't guarantee. "David always said you were the best," Rachel said after a moment. "That if anyone could get a team through impossible odds, it was Ghost." Jack felt the weight of those words, the responsibility they carried. "Your brother was a hell of an operator, one of the finest I ever served with. Whatever happens tonight, we do it for him. And for the others, we lost." Rachel nodded, resolve hardening her features. "For David." As night fell, they moved out, each team member heading to their assigned position. Mike departed first, taking a roundabout route to the western side of Blackwood's compound. Carlos and Freeman established their overwatch positions on the ridges, their radios silent except for brief status updates. Jack and Rachel prepared at the secondary launch point. They had selected a small secluded inlet a mile upriver from their previous entry point. They would approach the cave from a different angle this time, using the underwater terrain for concealment. "Remember," Jack instructed as they donned their wetsuits, "once we have the device, we follow the current to the extraction point. No detours, no heroics. The priority is securing the SADM." Rachel checked her underwater light and rebreather. "And if we encounter Blackwood's divers?" Jack patted the specialized underwater handgun secured to his thigh. "We avoid if possible. Engage only if necessary." The night was darker than the previous evening, clouds obscuring the stars and moon. Perfect conditions for their operation. Jack checked his watch, 11:30. Mike's distraction was scheduled for midnight, giving them 30 minutes to reach the cave. "Overwatch 1 status," Jack whispered into his radio. "Perimeter clear on the east side," Freeman reported. "2 guards at the river checkpoint rotation in 20 minutes. Overwatch 2. Main camp shows normal activity," Carlos confirmed. "Diving equipment is prepped for tomorrow, but no divers in the water currently." "Demolition." "In position," Mike responded. "Charges set. Ready on your mark." Jack turned to Rachel. "Last chance to back out." She gave him a look that was pure determination. Not a chance. They slipped into the dark water, the cold immediately penetrating their wetsuits. Using small, powerful underwater propulsion devices, they made rapid progress downriver, staying close to the bottom, where the current was weakest. Visibility was worse than the previous night, requiring them to stay closer together. Jack led the way, navigating by memory and occasional glimpses of the riverbank through the murky water. The cave entrance appeared suddenly before them, a dark opening in the rock face. They paused at the entrance, Jack surveying for any signs of recent activity. Finding none, he signaled Rachel to follow him inside. The passage seemed narrower than before, the current stronger as it funneled through the restricted space. They emerged into the main chamber and surfaced, carefully alert for any sound that might indicate they weren't alone. The grotto remained as they had left it, silent and undisturbed. "Looks clear," Jack whispered, removing his rebreather. Rachel checked her watch. 10 minutes until Mike's distraction. They moved to the wall containing the hidden compartment. Jack located the Morse code markings and pressed against the rock panel. It swung open smoothly, revealing the SADM still secured within. "Right where we left it." Rachel breathed relief evident in her voice. Jack carefully removed the cylindrical device, assessing its condition. Despite decades underwater, the specialized casing had protected the internal components. He placed it gently into the waterproof transport container they had brought. "Ready for extraction," he reported into his radio. "Copy that," Mike responded. "Distraction commencing in 3, 2, 1. The distant sound of explosions reached them even within the cave, followed by the unmistakable roar of secondary detonations. Mike had targeted Blackwood's fuel storage. "That's our cue," Jack said, securing the container to his harness. "Let's move." They re-entered the water, Jack now burdened with the weight of the device. Their progress would be slower, but the current would help once they were back in the main river channel. The cave passage seemed more constricted on the return journey, the water flowing against them as they maneuvered toward the exit. Jack led the way, using handholds in the rock to pull himself forward against the current. As they approached the cave mouth, Jack suddenly froze, signaling Rachel to stop. Ahead, flashlight beams cut through the murky water divers entering the cave. Blackwood's men likely responding to the distraction by securing all sensitive areas. Jack pointed upward, where a small air pocket formed against the cave ceiling. They surfaced silently, keeping only their faces above water. "Two divers blocking our exit," Jack whispered. "Armed." Rachel's eyes widened. "Options." Jack assessed their situation rapidly. "Secondary exit. There's another passage I spotted yesterday, branches off about 20 feet back. Might be tighter, but should connect to the river downstream." They submerged again and retreated, locating the narrow fissure in the rock wall. Jack tested it first, determining it was just wide enough to accommodate them and the device. He entered carefully, using his light sparingly to avoid detection. The passage twisted sharply downward, then leveled out, extending for what seemed like an eternity through the underwater rock. Just as Jack's air supply was reaching critical levels, the tunnel widened and then opened into the main river. They emerged nearly a quarter-mile downstream from the cave entrance, well away from Blackwood's divers. The current caught them immediately, pulling them toward their extraction point. Jack checked the device container secure and intact. "Ghost to team," he transmitted once they were clear. "Package secured. Proceeding to extraction point Alpha." "Copy that," Carlos responded. "Be advised, heavy activity at the main camp. They've deployed search teams along both banks." "Understood. Maintaining underwater approach." Jack and Rachel used the river's current to their advantage, staying deep where the water moved fastest. The weight of the device made maneuvering difficult, but Jack compensated with powerful strokes. They surfaced briefly to check their position, finding themselves approaching the prearranged extraction point, a small cove marked by 3 distinctive boulders. Mike should be waiting with the vehicle to transport the device to a secure location. As they neared the shore, Jack signaled Rachel to stop. Something felt wrong. The cove was too quiet, too still. He scanned the tree line carefully, noticing a slight movement among the shadows. "Ambush," he mouthed silently to Rachel. Her eyes widened in alarm. Before they could retreat, searchlights suddenly illuminated the water around them, and a voice called out from shore. "I know you're there, Ghost," Blackwood's voice amplified by a megaphone. "Did you really think I wouldn't anticipate your extraction route?" Jack pulled Rachel behind a partially submerged boulder, shielding her from view. "Stay down," he whispered. "On my signal, dive deep and head downstream. Don't surface until you're at least half a mile away." "What about you, the device?" "I'll create a diversion. Get to Carlos's position. He'll extract you." Rachel gripped his arm. "That's suicide, Jack. There must be 20 men out there." 22, Jack corrected with a grim smile. "But they're expecting Navy SEALs to fight like Navy SEALs. Time to show them how a ghost really operates." Before Rachel could protest further, Jack unclipped the device container from his harness and secured it to hers. "Get this to safety. Whatever happens." "Ghost," Blackwood called again. "You have 30 seconds to surrender before my men open fire. You know we have the advantage here." Jack reached into his dive bag and removed a small object, one of Mike's special charges. "When this goes off, you move. Don't look back. Don't hesitate. Just go." Rachel nodded, though her eyes reflected her conflict. "Jack?" "Tell Mike and Carlos it was like old times," Jack said softly. "Now get ready." He activated the charge and hurled it toward the opposite side of the cove. The explosion sent water and debris shooting skyward, immediately drawing fire from Blackwood's men. In the chaos, Rachel dove beneath the surface and disappeared downstream, the precious cargo secured to her back. Jack moved in the opposite direction, firing his underwater pistol toward the shore, to maintain the illusion that both of them were heading that way. Bullets sliced through the water around him as he zigzagged toward a different section of the riverbank. Using the skills that had earned him his call sign, Jack vanished beneath the surface, emerging only when necessary for air. He led Blackwood's men on a pursuit away from Rachel's escape route, buying her the time she needed to reach safety. The night erupted in gunfire and shouted commands as Blackwood's entire operation focused on capturing the elusive former SEAL. But Jack Harlow hadn't survived 3 decades of special operations by being predictable. Like the river itself, he was both powerful and impossible to grasp, flowing around obstacles, finding paths of least resistance, disappearing only to resurface where least expected. The hunt had begun in earnest. But in the darkness of the Colorado River, a ghost was leading the hunters exactly where he wanted them to go. The pre-dawn darkness shrouded the Colorado River in silence, broken only by the occasional call of night birds. On the eastern ridge overlooking Blackwood's compound, Carlos Rodriguez lay motionless beneath a ghillie suit, his sniper rifle trained on the main camp. Through his scope, he counted 14 men moving with military precision, their faces tense, their weapons ready. The night's events had transformed Blackwood's operation from a covert search into an armed camp preparing for war. His radio crackled softly. "Overwatch 2 status report," Rachel's voice tightly controlled despite the circumstances. "Compound remains on high alert," Carlos replied quietly. "No sign of ghost." The silence that followed carried the weight of unspoken concern. 6 hours had passed since Jack had created a diversion, allowing Rachel to escape with the nuclear device. 6 hours with no communication, no confirmation of his status. Rachel had made it to the secondary extraction point where Mike waited with the vehicle. They'd transported the SADM to Jack's cabin, securing it in the reinforced basement, while they regrouped and assessed their situation. Now, with dawn approaching, the team faced their greatest challenge, yet completing the mission without their leader. "Movement at the south entrance," Carlos reported, adjusting his scope. "Vehicle approaching. Black SUV heavily armored." Through his scope, he watched as the vehicle stopped at the security checkpoint. The rear door opened, and a figure emerged, tall, silver-haired, radiating authority even at this distance. "Blackwood is on site," Carlos confirmed. "Looks agitated." At Jack's cabin, Rachel paced the floor, her wet hair still damp from the river. The SADM sat on the workshop table, its innocuous appearance belying its destructive potential. Mike worked methodically to assess the device's condition, his large hands surprisingly delicate as he examined the ancient weapon. "How bad is it?" Rachel asked, pausing her pacing. Mike grunted, not looking up from his work. 50 years underwater hasn't done it any favors, but these things were built to last. Power core is still active." He glanced up, his expression grave. "It's functional." Rachel's stomach tightened. "Can you disarm it?" "Given time, maybe, but moving it is risky without proper containment equipment." Mike straightened, rolling his shoulders to ease the tension. "We need that government contact Jack mentioned." "Which only Jack knows," Rachel said, frustration evident in her voice. The cabin door opened, and Police Chief Freeman entered, his weathered face lined with exhaustion. "No sign of Jack along the north bank. Blackwood's men are everywhere, setting up checkpoints on all roads leading out of River Point." Rachel braced her hands against the table, mind racing through options. "Carlos is still in position observing the compound. If they captured Jack, he'd let us know. Or unless they're keeping him somewhere out of sight," Freeman pointed out. "No," Mike said firmly. "If Blackwood had captured Ghost, he'd make a show of it. Use him as leverage." The unspoken alternative hung heavy in the air, that Jack hadn't been captured but killed. Rachel refused to consider it. "We proceed as if Jack is still operational," she decided. "The mission remains the same: secure the device and neutralize Blackwood." Mike nodded approvingly. "Ghost would say the same thing." Rachel turned to the map spread across the table. Blackwood knows we have the device. His options are limited. He either tries to recover it or he cuts his losses and runs. He won't run, Mike said, shaking his head. Not Blackwood, not with a payday this big at stake. Then he comes for us, Rachel concluded, and we'll be ready. For the next hour, they fortified the cabin, creating defensive positions and preparing for a potential assault. Mike rigged early warning devices along the approach routes, while Freeman established communication with his most trusted deputy, instructing him to monitor Blackwood's movements in town without engaging. Rachel contacted her supervisor at ONI using a secure satellite phone, careful to provide only essential details. Asset secured, but situation critical. Need extraction team with containment capabilities. Time frame, came the terse reply. Rachel glanced at the nuclear device. ASAP, potential hostile intervention imminent. Nearest team is 8 hours out. Maintain position and asset security. 8 hours. They needed to hold out against whatever Blackwood threw at them for 8 long hours. As the sun crested the eastern ridge, casting long shadows through the pines, Carlos's voice broke the silence. Multiple vehicles departing the compound. Looks like they're spreading out to search the area. Rachel moved to the window, peering through the blinds at the dirt road leading to the cabin. How many? 4 vehicles, 3 men each, heavily armed. They're hunting us, Mike said grimly, checking the magazine on his sidearm. Let them come, Freeman replied, his old ranger training evident in his steady calm. They don't know what they're walking into. Rachel turned away from the window, her decision made. We need to split up. Divide their focus. She pointed to the map. Mike, take the device to this location, the old mining shed on the western ridge. It's defensible and provides good visibility. Mike studied the location, nodding slowly. Good choice. What about you? I'll create a diversion, make them think the device is with me. She traced a route along the river. If I can draw enough of them away, it improves our odds. That's suicide, Freeman protested. Rachel's eyes hardened. It's tactics. Blackwood wants this device badly enough to risk everything. We use that against him. Before anyone could argue further, Carlos's urgent voice came through the radio. Incoming multiple vehicles approaching from the South Road. ETA 2 minutes. Rachel turned to Mike. Get the device out now. Use the tunnel. Jack had shown them the escape passage he'd built beneath the cabin, emerging in a small ravine 200 yards to the north. Mike carefully secured the SADM in a reinforced case and disappeared through the hidden door in the pantry. Freeman took up position at the rear window, rifle ready. Carlos, maintain overwatch and provide support fire only if absolutely necessary, Rachel instructed. We need your position to remain unknown. Copy that, came the terse reply. Rachel checked her weapon, a compact submachine gun from Jack's arsenal, and moved to the front window. In the distance, dust clouds marked the approach of Blackwood's men. Here they come, she murmured. The vehicles stopped at the tree line, maintaining distance from the cabin. Men deployed in tactical formation, using the trees for cover as they established a perimeter. Their movements were disciplined, professional, not common mercenaries, but trained operators. Rachel's radio crackled. This is Blackwood. The voice was calm, cultured, carrying none of the strain evident in his men's body language. I know you can hear me. Let's discuss this situation like reasonable people. Rachel exchanged glances with Freeman, who shook his head in warning. I have no quarrel with you personally, Blackwood continued when no response came. My interest is purely in recovering what belongs to me. Return the device, and my men will withdraw. You have my word. His word, Freeman spat quietly. The word of a traitor. Rachel remained silent, watching as Blackwood's men continued to establish firing positions around the cabin. They were being surrounded methodically, professionally. Any response would only confirm their location. Very well, Blackwood's voice came again after a minute of silence. Perhaps you need some motivation. I have something, or rather someone, who might change your mind. A chill ran down Rachel's spine as one of the vehicles moved forward, stopping in the clearing 50 yards from the cabin. The rear door opened, and two men dragged a third figure into view. Even at this distance, Rachel recognized Jack Harlow. His face was bruised, his clothing torn and wet, but he was alive, standing defiantly between his captors. "Final offer," Blackwood called. "The device for Lieutenant Harlow. You have 5 minutes to decide." Rachel's mind raced. Jack was alive, but captured. Mike was en route to the mining shed with the SADM. Carlos maintained overwatch from the ridge. The extraction team was hours away. The variables had changed, but the objective remained the same: secure the device, neutralize Blackwood. "What's the play?" Freeman asked quietly, never taking his eyes from the window. Rachel made her decision. "We give him what he wants, or what he thinks he wants." She reached for the radio. "Blackwood, we're coming out. Hold your fire." "Rachel, no," Freeman protested. She silenced him with a look. "Trust me." Lowering her voice, she spoke into the radio again. "Carlos, maintain position. Be ready to provide cover on my signal." "Copy," came the sniper's terse reply. Rachel removed an identical case from Jack's storage room, same dimensions as the one containing the SADM, but filled with lead weights to mimic the device's heft. A decoy prepared for exactly this scenario. "Stay here," she instructed Freeman. "When the shooting starts, extract through the tunnel and rendezvous with Mike." The police chief nodded reluctantly, understanding her plan. "Watch yourself out there." Rachel took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped onto the cabin's porch. The decoy case held visibly in her hands. 20 yards away, Jack stood between his captors, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of her. "That's far enough," Blackwood called from behind the cover of an SUV. "Place the case on the ground and step back." "Release Jack first," Rachel demanded, her voice carrying across the clearing. Blackwood's laugh held no humor. "I don't think you're in a position to make demands, Ms. Harper." The use of her real name sent a jolt through Rachel, but she maintained her composure. "Then we're at an impasse. Because if anything happens to me, this case is rigged to destroy its contents." A tense silence followed as Blackwood considered his options. Finally, he gestured to his men. "Release him, but slowly." The guards shoved Jack forward. He stumbled slightly, regaining his balance with the careful movement of someone fighting through pain. As he walked toward Rachel, their eyes met, a silent communication passing between them. "Stop there, Lieutenant," Blackwood ordered when Jack was halfway across the clearing. "Ms. Harper, the case. Now." Rachel slowly placed the case on the ground. "Your turn." Blackwood nodded, and Jack was allowed to continue forward. As he passed Rachel, their shoulders nearly touching, he murmured a single word: "When?" She understood immediately. Jack had a plan. One of Blackwood's men approached to retrieve the case weapon trained on Rachel. The moment he bent to lift it, Jack spun with unexpected speed, for a man who appeared injured, tackling Rachel to the ground as gunfire erupted from the trees. But the shots weren't aimed at them. Carlos had opened fire from his hidden position, the precision shots striking key targets: the SUV's engine block, the radio operator, the fuel tank of one of the vehicles. Simultaneously, an explosion rocked the far side of the perimeter, Mike's handiwork creating confusion and dividing Blackwood's forces. Jack pulled Rachel behind the cover of the cabin's porch as bullets splintered the wood around them. Decoy? He asked, nodding toward the case now in Blackwood's possession. Of course, she replied, managing a tight smile despite the chaos. The real one's with Mike. Good. Jack grimaced, pressing a hand to his side where blood seeped through his torn shirt. Blackwood will figure that out quickly. We need to move. They crawled through the cabin door as firefights erupted across the property. Freeman provided covering fire from the rear window, allowing them to reach the tunnel entrance. What happened to you? Rachel asked, as they moved through the narrow passage, the sounds of battle muffled by earth above them. Played possum after our separation. Jack explained, his breathing labored. Let them capture me when the time was right. Needed to get close to Blackwood. You could have been killed, Rachel admonished, helping him navigate a particularly tight section of the tunnel. Jack's grin was visible even in the dim light. Occupational hazard. They emerged in the ravine north of the cabin, the sounds of gunfire still audible but more distant now. Freeman joined them moments later, covering their six, as they moved through the forest toward the mining shed, where Mike waited with the real device. Carlos, Jack asked, checking his borrowed sidearm. Still in overwatch position, Rachel confirmed. He'll cover our retreat, then exfiltrate to the rendezvous point. They moved quickly but cautiously through the pine forest, using natural cover and the terrain to mask their approach. Jack, despite his injuries, navigated with the instinctive skill of a man who had operated in hostile territory for decades. The mining shed appeared ahead, a weathered wooden structure built into the hillside, offering both concealment and defensive positions. Mike had chosen well. Ghost to demolition, Jack transmitted on their secure channel. Approaching your position from the east. 3 friendlies. Copy that, Mike responded. Perimeter secure. Welcome to the party. Inside the abandoned mining shed, Mike had transformed the space into a defensible position. The SAD-M sat in its protective case on a workbench surrounded by improvised early warning devices and booby traps. Extraction team, Jack asked, examining Mike's handiwork with approval. 8 hours out, Rachel replied, helping Jack ease onto a wooden crate. She examined his wounds, a deep gash along his ribs, various contusions, but nothing immediately life-threatening. Blackwood will figure out he's been tricked within minutes, Jack said, wincing as Rachel cleaned his wounds with supplies from the medical kit. We need to be ready. Always am, Mike responded, patting one of several explosive charges he'd positioned around the perimeter. Anyone comes within 50 yards uninvited, they'll have a very bad day. Freeman took up position at a narrow window, scanning the approaches with binoculars. No movement yet, but they'll be coming. Jack nodded, his tactical mind already formulating plans. Blackwood's down to about 15 men after Carlos's ambush. He'll split them some to hunt us others to secure an exit strategy. The device is what matters, Rachel reminded them. We hold position until the extraction team arrives. Jack shook his head. Blackwood won't wait that long. He's desperate now, which makes him unpredictable. He struggled to his feet despite Rachel's protests. We need to end this, permanently. How, Freeman asked, never taking his eyes from the window. Jack moved to the map Mike had pinned to the wall, studying the terrain. We draw him in, make him think he's gaining the upper hand, then spring the trap. For the next 20 minutes, they developed a plan that would utilize their limited resources against Blackwood's superior numbers. The natural bottleneck of the valley leading to the mining shed provided defensive advantages. Mike's explosives would channel the enemy force into prepared killing zones. Carlos, still in his sniper hide, would provide overwatch and precision fire. As they finalized the details, Jack's borrowed radio crackled to life. Lieutenant Harlow, Blackwood's voice tight with controlled rage, that was a clever deception. I underestimated you. Jack exchanged glances with the others before responding. Old habits die hard, Blackwood. Indeed, but this game has gone on long enough. I want that device. Then come and get it, Jack replied simply. Blackwood's laugh held no humor. Oh, I intend to. But first a demonstration of my resolve. The distant sound of an explosion reached them, followed by the radio transmission. That was the east side of River Point. Next will be the town center. Innocent people will keep dying until you surrender the device. Freeman's face paled. My God, he's bombing the town. Jack's expression hardened. It's a bluff. He wouldn't risk that kind of attention. As if in answer, another explosion sounded, this one closer and more powerful. Still think I'm bluffing, Ghost? Blackwood taunted. You have 30 minutes to deliver the device to the river crossing, or the next target is the elementary school. Jack lowered the radio, his mind racing through scenarios. Blackwood was escalating beyond all rational limits, threatening civilians, creating a situation that couldn't be contained. We can't risk it, Freeman said, the protection of his town overriding all other considerations. If we give him the device, thousands more will die, Rachel countered. Jack made his decision. We don't give him the real device, and we don't let him destroy the town. He turned to Mike. How quickly can you create another decoy? Mike considered the question. 20 minutes, maybe less. Won't fool him for long, though. It doesn't need to, just long enough to get him where we want him. Jack traced a location on the map, a narrow bend in the river south of town. Here, the bottleneck. We can trap him between the cliffs and the water. As Mike worked to create a convincing decoy, Jack outlined his plan. It was audacious, dangerous, and relied on perfect timing and execution. But it was their only chance to stop Blackwood before more innocent lives were lost. Carlos, Jack transmitted to their hidden sniper. New position, South Bend Eastern Ridge. We're drawing Blackwood there. Copy that, came the reply. Moving now. Rachel studied Jack's face, recognizing the cold determination in his eyes. You're going to kill him, she stated simply. Jack met her gaze without flinching. He's a traitor who's threatened American civilians. He forfeited any right to mercy a long time ago. 25 minutes later, Jack stood alone at the river crossing the decoy case at his feet. His wounds had been hastily rebandaged, his posture deliberately suggesting greater injury than he actually suffered. A tactical choice let Blackwood underestimate him one final time. Blackwood's remaining forces approached cautiously, using the terrain for cover weapons trained on Jack's position. Blackwood himself emerged last, flanked by his two most trusted lieutenants, the tall, cold-eyed man Jack had observed in the command trailer, and another with the unmistakable bearing of Spetsnaz. Hands where we can see them, Lieutenant, Blackwood called, maintaining his distance. Jack raised his hands slowly. No more civilians, Blackwood. This ends between us. A noble sentiment. Blackwood gestured to the case. Open it, slowly. But Jack complied, revealing what appeared to be the Esadem within. Mike's craftsmanship was impressive. At a distance, the decoy was virtually indistinguishable from the real device. Step away from it, Blackwood ordered. As Jack backed up, Blackwood's technical expert approached, examining the device without touching it. After a moment, he looked up and nodded. Satisfied? Jack asked, maintaining the charade. Almost. Blackwood drew his sidearm, aiming it casually at Jack's chest. There's still the matter of our unfinished business from Helmand. You mean your betrayal, selling out your own country for money? Blackwood's expression hardened. I prefer to think of it as recognizing changing loyalties in a shifting world order. The Cold War taught us that much alliances are temporary, but power is permanent. And 4 dead seals, was that just business too? Collateral damage, Blackwood replied dismissively. Nothing personal. Jack's eyes narrowed. It was personal to me. Before Blackwood could respond, the sound of an approaching helicopter broke the standoff. All eyes turned skyward as a military Black Hawk appeared over the ridge, hovering menacingly. Blackwood's expression shifted from confidence to calculation. Your extraction team arrived early. Impressive. He gestured to his men. Secure the device, quickly. As they moved toward the case, Jack gave the signal 3 rapid clicks on his radio transmitter. Instantly, the ridgeline erupted with precision sniper fire. Carlos, in his new position, took out Blackwood's technical expert with a clean headshot, then shifted to eliminate the communications operator. Simultaneously, explosives detonated along the only escape route, cutting off Blackwood's forces from reinforcement or retreat. The carefully orchestrated ambush caught them in a deadly crossfire between Carlos on the ridge and Mike and Freeman, positioned in the tree line. In the chaos, Jack drew his concealed weapon and dove for cover as Blackwood's men returned fire. The decoy case left exposed in the open ground became the focus of the firefight, exactly as planned. "Secure the device!" Blackwood shouted above the gunfire, desperation creeping into his voice. 2 of his men broke cover, rushing toward the case. Jack allowed them to reach it, to begin carrying it toward their commander. The moment the case changed hands, Mike triggered the final surprise. A small charge hidden within the decoy, not powerful enough to kill, but sufficient to incapacitate and create confusion. The explosion sent the men flying, the case rupturing to reveal its worthless contents. Blackwood's face contorted with rage as he realized the deception. "It's over, Blackwood," Jack called from his position behind a boulder. "Your men are dead or wounded. There's nowhere to run." "Where is it?" Blackwood demanded, his composure finally cracking. "Where's the real device? Safe, beyond your reach." The helicopter circled lower, its spotlight illuminating the battlefield where Blackwood stood increasingly alone as his men fell to the precision fire from the ridge. Blackwood's eyes darted around, assessing his deteriorating situation. With the cold calculation of a man accustomed to self-preservation, he grabbed his wounded radio operator as a human shield and began backing toward the river. "This isn't over, Ghost," he shouted over the helicopter's rotor wash. "There are more devices out there, more secrets buried. This was just one piece of a larger puzzle." Jack emerged from cover weapon trained on Blackwood's position. "There's no escape route, Marcus. Surrender, and you might live to see trial." Blackwood's laugh was hollow. "We both know that's not going to happen." In a swift motion, he shoved his human shield toward Jack and turned to dive into the river, his last possible escape route. Jack hesitated for a split second, catching the wounded man rather than firing at Blackwood's retreating form. But Blackwood never reached the water. A single shot rang out distinctive even amid the chaos, the unmistakable report of a high-powered sniper rifle. Blackwood's body jerked violently, then collapsed at the river's edge. Jack looked toward the source of the shot, not the eastern ridge where Carlos was positioned, but the river itself. There, partially emerged from the dark water, a figure rose slowly into view. Rachel, in her tactical wetsuit, water streaming from her auburn hair, the specialized underwater sniper rifle in her hands still trained on Blackwood's motionless form. The sight was surreal, a warrior emerging from the depths, like some avenging spirit of the river itself. The remaining mercenaries, witnessing their leader's fall and the apparition rising from the water, threw down their weapons in surrender. "Target eliminated." Rachel's calm voice came through the radio, her eyes never leaving her scope until she confirmed Blackwood was no longer a threat. Jack approached the river's edge as Rachel waded to shore, her movements graceful despite the cumbersome equipment. "That was one hell of a shot," he said quietly. "For David," she replied simply, water dripping from her wetsuit as she stood before him, the rifle finally lowered. The helicopter landed in the clearing, disgorging a team of grim-faced government operatives in unmarked tactical gear. Their leader approached Jack and Rachel, showing credentials that identified him as Department of Energy Nuclear Emergency Response Team. "Where's the device?" he asked, without preamble. Jack nodded toward the ridge where Mike was now visible, descending carefully with the SADM in its protective case. "Secure and intact," Jack confirmed. "Though I'd recommend careful handling. It's been underwater for 50 years. The team moved with practiced efficiency, establishing a secure perimeter as Mike delivered the nuclear device to the waiting specialists. Medical personnel attended to the wounded, while others secured Blackwood's surviving men for transport and interrogation. Jack found himself standing with Rachel, Mike, Carlos, and Freeman at the edge of the clearing, watching as the helicopter lifted off with its dangerous cargo secured. "What happens now?" Freeman asked, watching the aircraft disappear beyond the ridge. "Now." Jack exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the past days, of the past decades, begin to lift. "Now we disappear again. All of us. This operation never happened. The device was never found." "And Blackwood?" Rachel asked. "Just another unidentified body discovered in the Colorado River. Tragic accident." They stood in silence for a moment, the five unlikely warriors who had prevented catastrophe through skill, courage, and the bonds forged in combat. "I could use a drink," Mike finally said, breaking the tension. Carlos chuckled. "Make it a double." "My place," Freeman offered. "Seems yours has some structural damage, Jack." As they began the long walk back toward town, Jack fell into step beside Rachel. "That shot," he said quietly, "from the river. You planned that all along, didn't you?" Rachel's eyes met his, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "You weren't the only one with a call sign Ghost. They called me Nymph in O&I field operations. The water was always my element." "David would be proud," Jack said softly. "He would be proud of all of us." 3 weeks later, Jack Harlow stood on his rebuilt dock, casting his line into the Colorado River, as the morning sun painted the canyon walls in shades of amber and gold. The town of River Point had returned to its peaceful routine, the events of that fateful night already fading into whispered legends and speculation. The official story, a drug cartel's failed attempt to establish a smuggling route, thwarted by local law enforcement with federal assistance, had been accepted without much question. In small towns, some truths were better left unexamined. Jack's cabin had been rebuilt courtesy of anonymous government contractors who worked with remarkable efficiency. His bait shop had reopened, attracting the usual mix of tourists and locals seeking advice on fishing spots and lure selection. To the casual observer, everything had returned to normal. But normality was a relative concept for a man who had spent his life in the shadows. "Catch anything?" Rachel's voice came from behind him. Jack turned to see her approaching along the shoreline, dressed in civilian clothes, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders. She looked different outside of tactical gear, softer somehow, though Jack knew the strength that lay beneath the surface. "Not yet," he replied, reeling in his empty line. "But fishing's not really about catching fish." "No." She joined him on the dock. "What is it about, then?" "Patience, presence, being still enough to notice the world around you." Rachel smiled. "Philosophy from a seal. Who would have thought old seals get philosophical? It's either that or bitter." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the river flow past. In the weeks since the confrontation with Blackwood, Rachel had remained in River Point, ostensibly on extended leave from Oni, while completing paperwork related to the operation. The reality, which neither of them acknowledged openly, was more complex. "Mike and Carlos left this morning," Rachel said after a while. "Mike's heading back to Montana. Carlos to his clinic in Tucson." Jack nodded. He'd said his goodbyes last night over whiskey and war stories at Freeman's house. Some farewells were easier with the buffer of alcohol and shared memories. "And you?" he asked, not looking at her. "When do you report back?" Rachel's hesitation was brief but noticeable. "I've been offered a position with the DOE's Nuclear Emergency Search Team. My experience with the SADM made an impression." "You'd be good at it," Jack acknowledged. "They need people who understand field operations, not just the technical aspects." "I haven't accepted yet." Jack finally turned to look at her. "What's holding you back?" Rachel met his gaze steadily. "I thought I came to River Point for closure, for David, to finally put the past to rest. And now I'm not so sure that's what I found." She gestured toward the river, the town, the mountains beyond. "There's a peace here, a different rhythm to life." Jack understood. After decades of operations briefings, the constant vigilance of intelligence work, the simplicity of river life held a powerful appeal. He'd felt it himself when he first arrived in River Point 7 years ago. "It gets under your skin," he admitted. "The river, the community. Even when you think you want to be alone, there's something comforting about being part of something this permanent." The river had been flowing for millions of years. It would continue long after they were gone. There was a humbling perspective in that thought. "Freeman offered me a deputy position," Rachel said, surprising him. "Said the town could use someone with my training." Jack raised an eyebrow. "River Point's not exactly a hotbed of crime." "No," she agreed with a small smile. "But it has other attractions." The unspoken question hung between them. Jack had spent years cultivating solitude, building walls between himself and the world. Rachel's presence had breached those defenses in ways he hadn't anticipated. Before he could respond, movement on the far bank caught his attention. A familiar figure in a police uniform waved from beside a patrol vehicle. "Speaking of Freeman," Jack said, raising a hand in acknowledgement. Rachel squinted across the water. "What's he doing?" Weekly check-in. Started after everything that happened. His way of keeping an eye on me without being obvious about it. "He cares about you," Rachel observed. "They all do. The town, I mean. You're not as invisible as you think, Ghost." Jack considered this. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps years of quiet presence had formed connections he hadn't recognized or acknowledged. "If you stayed," he said carefully, "it wouldn't be exciting. Not like Oni or counterterrorism operations." "I've had enough excitement for several lifetimes," Rachel replied. "Maybe what I need now is continuity, roots." Jack recast his line, the familiar motion buying him time to consider his next words. "The cabin has a spare room, until you decide. No pressure either way." It was as close to an invitation as he could manage after years of self-imposed isolation. Rachel seemed to understand what the offer represented. "I'd like that," she said simply. Downstream, a fish jumped, creating ripples that expanded outward across the river's surface. Jack watched them spread, each circle growing wider, until they dissipated into the constant flow. Life was like that, sometimes a single event, creating patterns that extended far beyond their origin. The mission that had brought Rachel to River Point had concluded, but its effects continued to reshape their lives in unexpected ways. "We should get breakfast at Mabel's," Jack suggested. "Best pancakes in 3 counties." Rachel's smile brightened. "Lead the way." As they walked along the riverbank toward town, Jack felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. The weight of the past. Hellman, the lost teammates, the decades of solitary vigilance seemed less crushing somehow. At the edge of town, they passed the memorial that had been erected for the tragic explosion that had damaged several buildings. The official story maintained that a gas line rupture had caused the destruction. Only a handful of people knew the truth. Chief called a local shopkeeper, waving to Freeman, who had parked his patrol car at the diner. "Got those special flies you ordered?" "Afternoon, Ralph," Freeman replied. "I'll pick them up later." His eyes crinkled with genuine warmth as he spotted Jack and Rachel approaching. "Well now, look who's joining the land of the living. Thought you two might sleep till noon after last night's poker game." "Some of us have work," Jack retorted good-naturedly. "Fish don't catch themselves." "From the looks of your empty hands, they're not catching themselves for you either," Freeman observed with a wink to Rachel. The easy banter continued as they entered Mabel's diner, greeted by the familiar sense of coffee and home cooking. The morning crowd of locals nodded acknowledgments, making space at the counter without fanfare. This was River Point, unassuming, steady, resilient. It had absorbed the shock of recent events and returned to its natural rhythm like the river that gave it life. Jack settled onto a stool, Rachel beside him, Freeman to her right. Three warriors at rest, their battles temporarily concluded, finding unexpected peace in the simple pleasure of coffee and conversation. "So," Mabel asked as she poured their coffee, "what's the plan for today?" Jack glanced at Rachel, then out the window where the Colorado River flowed endlessly toward the horizon. "Nothing special," he replied. "Just taking it as it comes." For a man who had spent his life planning missions, anticipating threats, and preparing for every contingency, there was profound freedom in that simple statement. Just taking it as it comes, one day at a time. Present in the moment, rather than haunted by the past or anxious about the future. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher, burning away the river mist and illuminating River Point in clear golden light. A new day. A fresh start. And for Jack Harlow, the ghost who had finally found solid ground, the beginning of a life he'd never dared to imagine, might be his. The river would keep flowing, carrying its secrets. Some would remain buried in its depths for decades to come. Others would eventually surface, as all truths eventually must. But that was a concern for another day. For now, there was coffee to drink, breakfast to enjoy, and the quiet company of people who understood what it meant to serve, to sacrifice, and finally to come home.